Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Lilith. Lilith is a character that's usually okay in my book, but today's daily was just super awful. I don't think I've ever had a worse run, and that's not an exaggeration like maybe you hear people say it sometimes, and maybe at this point I've said I've had the worst run of my life a few times, and obviously you can't really remember how bad the runs were, but essentially this run was really bad, and not in the sense that maybe I wasn't strong enough or maybe that there weren't enough opportunities to become strong, but more as just it was so tedious and unfun to play, and I hate runs like that. I like it when you have a genuine challenge, when maybe you don't have enough damage, but maybe you have enough speed so you can able to dodge, or maybe you have just enough damage that it's still a challenge to kill enemies but not a chore to do it. And by that I mean, of course, with Lilith, every time you have a bad run, it's just gonna feel so much worse because you don't have the control over your familiars. And when you're playing as Lilith, you know, you have a few issues in your hand. Besides not being able to shoot properly, you're also pretty slow, and the fact that you rely on your active item to kind of stay relevant later in the game if you really don't get a super strong run. Those are all negatives that work towards her, but I think that the biggest problem with Lilith, or why people don't like her, is that just any run that is generally bad will feel just so much worse on her. And there's nothing more infuriating than trying to kill an enemy that's behind a rock, and you have to kind of reposition and then wait for your familiar to catch up and then shoot with the familiar, and it just ends up getting you hit so many times just because there aren't a lot of rooms like that that follow that same pattern, but there are some, and when they happen, they're obviously very annoying to deal with. But even more annoying than that, what happened on a few bosses. So if you get hit with Red Heart, obviously you lose the chance to get a Devil Deal. And what happened a few times is I actually got to the boss without getting hit, and then I got hit on the boss, which is one of the most unfortunate things that can happen, I think, in just any run, because you're so close to getting that Devil Deal or that Angel Room, and usually those deals are what actually carries the run. I would say that most often they're not treasure rooms and things like that. Sure, they give you some stat boosts, and of course there are some very good items in there, but if you're gonna win a run, you really have to do it through a Devil Deal to be somewhat reliable. And when you don't have access to those for whatever reason, in my case obviously I got hit a few too many times, then you're on a verge of a very weak run, and sadly that's exactly what happened today. And like I said before, with Lilith, even some good items aren't necessarily that good, so it's kinda easier to fall into that trap of being too weak. But besides me having a tedious run, there was some other thing that actually made this a little bit more infuriating. So we got the car battery in our first chop, and the car battery usually works really well with Lilith, because every time you use your active item, what happens is that instead of just using it once, you would use it twice, and in Lilith's case that means you would get 2 extra familiars. So that's usually very good. Of course, if you can get some familiars, if you can actually trade your health away at a blood bank to trigger that Cambion Conception to get maybe a Demon Baby or maybe even a Dark Bomb, because obviously that's pretty good in a lot of situations, and when you're able to do that, then the batteries is a really good item. And I would say that most often than not it's a good pickup on any character, but especially on Lilith, and especially in boss rush because you can use it multiple times. It can really add a bonus on top of that. But what happens later on is that I actually reroll my run and lose my active item, and that's kind of an unfortunate situation. But the fact that we had this combo, you know, we had the combo of having an active item and a battery, not the battery but the car battery. So when we used it, we would have potentially gotten 3 charges out of it, but that just never came to fruition, just because we didn't really have any of those strong combos. We didn't get more familiars, and at the same time, I just couldn't make it work for some reason. You know, you would think having 3 familiars would at least alleviate some of the problems we had. So having just 5 damage on the 5th floor is obviously pretty bad, but having 3 familiars shooting with penetrative shots, you might think, you know, that's pretty decent, because after all, you're kind of tripling your damage, and that's true in some regards, but in other regards, obviously, because those familiars stack up behind each other, it's actually hard to hit just one enemy. And it's just so unfortunate when you feel like you could have a good run, and you know that other people probably did have a good run, and you're having just a bad one. And maybe that's the fact that made it just a bit more unfortunate, and I'm just kind of struggling expressing that myself right now, but that's what I meant in the gist of it. Obviously, we're not late, or I mean too late to actually get to boss rush or to Hush, I think. At this point, I kind of realized that unless we get some good items here, some good setups, there's probably no way that we're gonna get to boss rush. There's still a slight chance to get to Hush, but with only 3 red hearts, I wouldn't put my money on it, especially just because we don't really have any means to deal with Hush. And with Hush, you do want penetrative shots, and that's mostly because he can spawn a lot of enemies which you have to shoot then and then kind of deal with, and that's really hard if you don't have a way to deal damage to multiple enemies at once. And even now, when we do have penetrative shots, I wouldn't still feel very comfortable, because obviously we just don't do enough damage and we really can't deal with that horde of enemies fast enough. And when he ducks, starts shooting his tears, starts spawning blue guys and blue flies, then it's pretty much game over for us. We had a very interesting choice there. So should we choose the 6th room and kind of give up that synergy, I guess, that we had before, that really kept us afloat, not afloat, but at least it gave us some fighting chance against the bosses. And I decided to actually reroll because the run was pretty terrible, and I rerolled into chocolate milk and some damage ups, and thankfully this run seems to be just a bit better. But one problem I have whenever you reroll and you get a lot of familiars, any familiar you pick after that is gonna get added to the end, and basically more familiars you have, the harder it becomes to actually shoot with that particular familiar. So what happens essentially, I get little Brimstone a bit later on, but he proves to be useless in this case just because he is at the end of the line, which means you can't really shoot with him reliably. So the only reliable familiar in this case is still our Incubus, and because we have chocolate milk and the cricket's head, we're dealing some nice damage, but it's still not anything to kind of write home about. Even though you see my damage be 27 on the left, I don't think that's actually completely correct. Or maybe it is, and we just had so low damage before that it seems like this is too high. But it does seem like something is not exactly right here. And I actually do try to make a rush for Harsh in this situation because I thought I have enough spirit hearts, and thankfully I have enough health to actually deal with it. But you can see that I got hit like 5 times against Mom just because I was trying to rush, and I was on the verge of dying, but thankfully I did manage to stay alive. So in this situation, you know, it's at that point that you just kind of give up on a run, and not really give up in the traditional sense of just quitting the run, but you just kind of lose the passion for it. You just feel like you shouldn't play anymore, and it just starts to feel like a slog. Because at this point, you know, we're not gonna get any fun synergies, we're not really gonna get a good challenge as well, because we're basically looking for easy ways out. And that's essentially what happens at every run that just proves to be super weak and you kind of come this late into the game. And you can probably tell that not everything is... I mean, this run didn't have much substance just by the way I talk about it. You know, this is not maybe as invigorating or as exciting as usual, but you know, if I had to pinpoint one mistake that I made, or a few mistakes that I made in this run, I would say is that on the 3rd or the 4th floor, well, it was an XL floor, so it was the 3rd and the 4th floor in general, I shouldn't have actually went back to explore, because I thought what I usually do before beating the boss, I explore the floor in hopes of maybe getting some runes or cards which would help me, maybe give me a reroll on the devil deal items. But just because that run was particularly weak in that situation, what I should have done is probably just get another charge of my active item and then fought the bighorn in that room and just try to beat him as fast as possible while I still had spirit hearts. When I actually explored and decided to use the hermit card, I went to the shop, and then I got hit a few too many times and I did lose all my spirit hearts, and then bighorn sadly hit me. And apparently bighorn, that was also maybe due to me not knowing his attack patterns well, because apparently when he throws a fire bomb at you, that bomb deals contact damage, which was something I didn't really expect, because so far I don't think any bomb I know deals contact damage. So that was an interesting revelation for me in that situation. I'll show you just how weak this run was in this case, and you'll see, sure, my bombs deal a lot of damage, and when I actually line up enemies to hit them with little brimstone, it doesn't look that bad. But when you're actually shooting or trying to kill enemies which have some HP but they're hard to deal with, then you kind of start seeing that this run is not going in the right direction. But like I said, even now that we rerolled, this is actually a much better run than what we had before, and it's still pretty bad. And the fact, I think the fact why I didn't enjoy this one that much, and even though I really like slog fests in the sense and playing slow runs which are maybe not that strong, is mostly because we are Lilith, and I think that's one of the cases that a lot of people can make. Just not being in control over your tears is a feeling that isn't very rewarding and just doesn't feel very nice, especially when you have to deal with enemies which teleport and spawn randomly and stomp on you, and you really can have a set strategy. And of course, the more time you spend fighting against a certain boss, the more chances there are that you're actually gonna get hit. So the fact I fought the bloat as well as my most hateful boss, which is the Peep. And there was also Death in this run, so kind of a very nice combination of bosses. I really don't like the Peep and Death as boss fights. I think they're cheap in their own ways, but just overall their attack patterns, their design just don't fit. I really don't like fighting them, and the fact we had both of those in this run, as well as Bloat, and we went to Shoal, I think is a good indication that this run is not something that you should have played if you did play it yourself. But anyway, we did finish in 400th place, which is probably an indication that I missed something pretty obvious. I know a lot of people did struggle with this run, but the fact we were 400th, I think I'm not that bad of a player. That maybe sounds a bit cocky, but I know I can reliably finish in a higher score, so the fact that I was this low probably means that I just missed boss rush, not boss rush, either boss rush or a devil duel somewhere, and then maybe missed a few damage ups or something like that. But yeah, we did finish where we did finish. I'm not salty or anything. I'm just pointing out maybe that this is lower than what I would expect to get from a daily run. Just overall, I'm trying to say that it was a very bad performance and that I definitely should have gotten hit so many times as I did. So yeah, 400, well, a bit higher than 400, so at least we got that, it's just something. 40 minutes, which is not that good at all. It's actually a very slow run as well, and our Shrek bonus was obviously low, and as you can tell from the sound of my voice, this I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed at all. So if you did, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time.